Throughout history, in many religions and cultures, self-imposed suffering or deprivation has been commonplace, be it in the form of self-flagellation or fasting. The practice of enduring intentional hardship was seen as a means of atoning for sin or partaking in a ritualistic act that would bring one closer to God. By willfully withstanding deliberate acts of harm and humbling yourself before the uncertainty and temporality of existence, you could, perhaps, prepare for and lessen the impact of larger calamities of the future. The shedding of blood is redemptive, and the resistance to lower-level desires purifying. It is a form of sacrifice and a behavior that highlights and serves to make us more aware of an undesirable but potentially necessary aspect of reality, that of tragedy. Human history, with all its progression, perseverance, and victory, is punctuated quite fiercely by immense and devastating tragedy. Be it the death of a loved one, a nationwide famine, or a world war, the earth inevitably takes away all that she gives. As painful as it may be, tragedy is a part of the natural order, the continuum within which all things come to be and come to end. The immediate reaction in the face of a tragedy is, it would be better if this would have not happened. For the rest of the animal kingdom, these events are part of the whole of existence, unfolding with little more consequence than any other event. But for us, they are something to be avoided and eradicated at all costs, an understandable sentiment, but one that overlooks the physical, psychological, and perhaps cosmic significance of catastrophe. Personal tragedy, such as the death of a family member or even a pet, offers a psychophysiological sensation and reaction that is incomparable to all other phenomena. For the human spirit, it provides a sobering humility and reverence for the temporary and fleeting construct we inhabit. While separating you from the person to whom you are so deeply attached, you are simultaneously drawn closer to the very essence of humanity, flown close enough to the sun to make you all too aware of your mortality, and emerging with a sense of gratitude for your chance to exist at all. In this short segment from a longer discussion, Brett Weinstein explains the evolutionary meaning behind grief.
I will argue that grief is the downside of love. And what I mean by that is when you love somebody, you prioritize them in your mind. Sounds trivial almost, but you prioritize them in your whole conscious schema. You expect them at certain places and times. You depend on them. You integrate them into your understanding of the world. And when they are lost, you have to unintegrate them.
This sudden gap in your once developed blueprint of reality causes the structure itself to become unstable, and this cavity must be repaired. There is a chance to rebuild a once calcified worldview into something better informed and more structurally sound, and the legacy of the lost person lives on through you, impacting and shaping the world in a way in which they could not do while physically present. Tragedy forges our spirit, deepens our sense of meaning, and provides an opportunity to reconstruct the lens through which we witness reality, changing how we interface with it, and therefore how we mold and influence it. The landscape of loss is a unique locale, and how we choose to fill that space directly affects our internal and external world into the future. This obviously has evolutionary implications as well. Evolution employs tragedy as a means of restructuring, redesigning, and ultimately improving itself. That which does not meet quality standards is selected for removal, and the remaining space is left to be filled by a more fitting counterpart. The continued destruction and reconstruction of the physical and the biological are essential to evolutionary progress. Evolution builds on what it has already crafted, but it cannot further develop or implement new systems or adaptations without first dispensing with its old, antiquated creations. Expanding this to a macro scale, tragedies that impact thousands of people, such as war or famine, distribute this effect across populations. Tragedy becomes an equalizing and unifying agent, merging otherwise stratified cultures and classes into a single unit of beings tasked with bearing the weight of the human condition together. Differences that once sharply divided become trivial, and that which we all share, the divine spark of existence, illuminates our sense of collective humanity. Let's look at a post-9/11 United States as an example. Watching the towers fall was like having the air sucked from your lungs and made you question how you were ever able to breathe in the first place. The skyline and the landscape had changed forever. The horrors were broadcast into every living room across the momentarily fractured nation, and we held our loved ones close. But we quickly set about repairing that fracture. The fear, anger, loss, confusion, and uncertainty fueled a movement of hope and brotherhood, and simply looking at the American flag meant something different than it had the day before. It was a reaction that could only be elicited by an event too tragic for words, and out of that tragedy was born a new nation. Tragedy not only occurs in the physical realm, but also in the psychological. We cling tightly to particular ideas and embody certain behaviors, so much so that they become deeply embedded as part of our perceived identity. Eventually, these patterns calcify and must be dispensed with if we are to maintain an upward trajectory and constant growth. The relinquishing of these parts of ourselves are individual tragedies all their own, each one a small death, a willful letting go of the old, dead matter that anchors us to the past. We must die unto ourselves and encounter the pain that accompanies the loss of who we once were in order to honorably partake in the endless cycle of death and rebirth that is essential to continued creation. I am in no way suggesting that we should not attempt to alleviate or mitigate needless suffering around the globe, nor is this an attempt to justify inhumane acts or atrocities. But the battle against tragedy is a battle against a cosmic force of balance, and the extent of its role in the eternal cycle is yet to be revealed. To act within the world is to willfully commune with a system that has tragedy woven into its very fabric, and to accept that seemingly unjust aspect as a necessary part of balance and progress. Cataclysm and violence are primary forces in the very origin of the universe. It is a foundational fragment of existence itself, one that is seemingly more common and more crucial than elation or happiness. Tragedy is the birth mother of humanity in all creation myths. It is the devouring mother and the tyrannical father. It is original sin. To quote Eric Neumann's The Origin and History of Consciousness, mutilation is the condition of all creation. Preparing oneself and one's kin for tragedy is an uncomfortable but mandatory task. Those who fail to forge their child's spirit against future tragedies face a much more severe tragedy as a consequence. The primary microexample is that of the overprotected child. The parent, in attempts to shield their vulnerable offspring from the often hellish nature of existence, prevents their child from partaking in any activities which may hurt them, be it physically or emotionally. This sheltering cannot be sustained forever, and when the child eventually enters into the world, they are unequipped for what lies ahead and have failed to develop the proper tools and mental antibodies for the tragedies they will face. The slightest hardship breaks their untempered spirit, and the process of recovery may lead to fear, bitterness, or may never occur at all. Once again, scaling this example, let's listen to what Dr. Peterson had to say about Hurricane Katrina on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast.
So here's a funny thing about New Orleans. What caused the New Orleans flood? Well, a hurricane.
No.
Yeah? No. How about human corruption? How about the corruption of the state? How about the fact that people knew the damn dikes weren't going to hold? That the levees weren't going to hold? How about that they knew that for 100 years and didn't care? How about that they pocketed the money that should have gone for their repair? And so in flood myths, you always see two things. You see that, I'm paraphrasing, say, there's a storm, there's dikes, and there's people responsible for maintaining the dikes. Well, a storm won't wipe out the city. It could. But if the dikes are high enough, then it won't. And if people aren't corrupt, then they build the dikes properly. And so God floods the world when the dikes have rotted and the people have become corrupt.
Failure to properly prepare for tragedy leads to a tragedy far more devastating and life-consuming than one for which you are equipped. This applies at a personal, transpersonal, societal, and civilizational level. We must be willing to integrate necessary tragedy into our lives and allow our children to encounter and contend with grave and dire circumstances in order for them to become a fully realized and developed person with proper resilience and character. To create a microcosm of the external world within our offspring, an all-encompassing roadmap within which they can navigate, is essential to the future success of the individual. The human spirit stands in opposition to the amoral forces of the universe, separating itself from the rest of the animal kingdom as the planet's conscious observer. and therefore its judge. Actions, behaviors, even instincts and unconscious systems are sorted and adjudicated by our critical and watchful eye. We separate right from wrong, good from evil, and where the rest of the planet merely sees that which is, we also see that which should not be. But no matter how unbearable or unjust these burdens may seem, they are part of the bedrock of time and space itself, without which our position in the cosmos would not have been secured. We are both victory and tragedy, elation and devastation. Neither can exist without the other, and we are at the mercy of a force to be reckoned with. Our days are numbered, but the tragedy that accompanies our death is certain to be followed by a comparable triumph and a continuation of the cycle of eternity.